Veiled voices of Iran and the Middle East. This is on the map where Iran is located. The country is called the Islamic Republic of Iran. And even though it is a very small piece of the earth, it has global impacts, and it has for a very long time. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is illegal for women to be present in public spaces without the veil, some kind of covering that doesn't allow their hair or any body part, including their skin, to be shown, other than their face, their hands, and any skin below the ankle. And the reason for that is that the Islamic Republic of Iran follows Sharia, which is the law of Islam. So the Muslim law, Sharia. And in there, it quotes this Bible passage the Quran, which is the Bible version of the Muslims, that women are to draw their cloaks over their bodies. And because it says that in the Quran, and because the Islamic Republic of Iran has its politics and its laws following the Quran, it turns out that women are not allowed to be seen in virtual or in physical spaces without this hijab or covering. And if you look at other religions besides Islam, you find that many of the religions of the world have this. From polytheistic religions like Hinduism to monotheistic religions like Christianity, there's this idea that one ought to cover themselves to be modest and to be graceful. So Islam is not special for doing this. However, in Islam, it says that a woman ought to choose to do this, that to compel a woman, to force a woman, a compulsory hijab is not allowed. That's what it says in the Quran. And nevertheless, you see that some Muslim countries are requiring it. So even if you, an American, were to go to some of these Muslim countries, you too would be required to wear it. For the folks in the back, there are chairs if you wanted to pull some out, and some empty seats right here in the front. So in Afghanistan, for example, the burqa is the kind of covering that's required. However, in Iran, which is the country we're going to focus on today, it is just the hijab. So these are pictures of women in Iran, and some of them use the chador, and some of them use what's called the hijab, which is a catch-all, as a covering. The veil was abolished in 1936. By the monarchy that was established in Iran. And that meant that after 1936, as long as the Pahlavi Shah was in charge, women were not allowed to cover. They were not allowed to follow the Islamic Republic's ideology, which was restored after the 1979 revolution. For the last 105 years, 4 men have been controlling the Iranian public. So you see the 4 men on the screen right here. The 2 of the left ones have the following flag, and they were trying to westernize. And the 2 second sets here, the Islamic flag, which is the current flag, they're trying to Islamify Iran now. But Iran has gone through a lot of different ownerships or governmentships or people being in charge enforcing their ideas. And what I want to do is dig deeper than the sound bites, going all the way back to the first instance of a Persian Empire and show you how cool this history is. So when you look at Iran today, it's that darker green in the middle. The Islamic Republic of Iran is just the tiny piece of the larger Persian Empire that used to control this area. And we're going to just think about this land for just a moment. You have some of the oldest stone engravings, so 10,000 years old, in what is left of the Persian Empire. You have some of the world's largest bodies of water in caves that you can actually go through with like a canoe or something. You have some really old, 2,400-year-old buildings that are still standing today. You can go there today and you can see this. And it is absolutely extraordinary, the kind of archaeology that they were able to produce. And some old hydraulic systems that were originally built and they've been maintained and they're still working today, even though they're over 2,000 years old. And their archaeology and their structures and their building making is world famous. So these are different along the Silk Road hotels, but there's also lots of beautiful landscaping in Iran that I also invite you to look up. So you've got some desert terrain, you've got mountains, you've got skiing, you've got hiking, you've got this beautiful place, which is not edited. That is literally what it looks like. So please look it up. These are actual homes that people are still living in today, and some other beautiful mosques. This is Kish, which is an island all the way down in Persian Gulf, and all the way at the top by the Caspian Sea. We have some Neanderthal skulls where it's revolutionizing what anthropologists are thinking humans came from and how they traveled and how they lived through the Ice Age and the Stone Age. Persians are responsible for contributing a lot to the scholarship of what we know of today. I want to focus on the addition of monotheism. So when the rest of the world that we know of was believing in multiple gods, the Persians were the first people to say there's actually one God and no God but that one true God. And that's called monotheism. And the Persians are the reasons why that the Hebrews became monotheistic. So it's a very pivotal moment in history. In monotheism, you have this idea of good versus evil, heaven and hell. You have this idea of judgment day, a virgin birth to a Messiah. You have all these ideas that come up later over and over. Folks in the back, there are 2 chairs here and 1 chair there. So sorry, there's also some chairs in the back. Zoroastrianism has this as its symbol, the Farabahar. It is one of the world's oldest symbols. And Persians have the original Santa Claus in our Nowruz, Baba Noel, and we have the original Thanksgiving. So lots of ancient traditions that come up constantly as more motifs later on. This is Atish Bahram. There are just a few of them in the world. They have been burning for over 1,000 years. So these Zoroastrian priests, they keep them alive. The Zoroastrian Shah or emperor or leader, governor, president, however you want to use the word, the person above all of the government, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great is very important for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that he expanded the Silk Road by connecting it with the Royal Road. And that, through Persia, connected China and India with Europe and Africa, which before they were unable to do the trading. And the road that he created went all the way to 1,400 Common Era. So the roads that he established were in use for over 1,000 years. Persia being in the center of all of that meant that all of the things coming from Asia and all of the things coming from Europe were going through Persia. So Persians were able to learn all of the stories and all of the myths. They were able to learn all of the scientific discoveries, and it made Persians really able to do a lot of things. It was a great foundation. When Cyrus the Great conquered all of these lands and then connected them under the Persian Empire, he did something that has never been done before and something that hasn't been done since. And he said that when he controls a new body of people, he will allow them to practice whatever religion they want. And that was unheard of before and after. When he conquered Babylon, he freed the Hebrews that were enslaved there, and he paid for them to go back to where they came from, where they were stolen from, and he gave to them all of their vessels that had been stolen along with him. And why that's important is because you have someone who has absolute influence saying that you are not allowed to persecute people according to what they believe. You're not allowed to oppress people according to what they believe. This is the Cyrus Cylinder, which is on display in the British Museum, that dictates all of these things. And a part of that Akkadian cuneiform helped us decipher a bunch of other writings, which is very important. So we're placing the Persians in between this long history of what has happened to the Jews, which will be important for what happens to Christianity. And it also helps us to understand why Cyrus the Great is very important. In the Persian Empire, and not again until 1948, were the Jews treated with respect, no matter what they believed. It's no wonder that Cyrus the Great is mentioned in the Talmud, in the Torah, and in your Christian Holy Bible. And this is the tomb of Cyrus the Great, and it's in a small village that's been preserved really well. Ethan, there's a seat right here. Last one. There you go. So Zoroastrianism spread throughout the ancient world, and with it came the idea that women are equal, that they should be treated as such, that they have autonomy. And so when you look at what women are treated as in Zoroastrianism, it is unlike anything else you've ever seen anywhere else in a major empire. For example, Pani, she is a warrior, she is a commander, she is also a beautiful woman who gets married and is a governor. There is Artemisia, who's a warrior, she's an admiral, she becomes the queen. At the end, she has her own coin, which is unheard of at this time. There's Irdabama, she is the wealthiest businesswoman, and we have records of her at Persepolis. She had both men and women working for her company that reached as far as Egypt and Syria, Media, and throughout Babylon. So now going down to Darius, he expands the Persian Empire, and this is what it looks like. It is larger than the United States, to give you a framework of what this land used to look like. And he is responsible for the Behistun inscription, which tells the same story in 3 major languages. And so this allows historians and scholars to later go and be able to uncode other languages. And so this is kind of like the Rosetta Stone of the ancient world for these ancient texts. This is Persepolis, which he creates as sort of like the capital of the Persian Empire. You can still go there today, and this is what it looks like. Their buildings from 2,400 years ago are still standing, and they are monumentous. Persepolis is also a book and a movie that tells the story of the Iran-Iraq War and the revolution, so you can also check that out. I have it here on display. Now let's go down to Xerxes, who's the famous Persian guy in the movie 300, which is only partially accurate. Xerxes is responsible for reaching Athens, Greece, and he burns down the Acropolis, which is the top of the hill where all of the Persians basically decimated and destroyed lots of knowledge, which is really, really sad. But when Alexander the Great takes over Persia, he reaches Persepolis, and then he burns down all of their libraries, and so we lose a lot of really valuable information. Youtab is one of the famous Zoroastrian Persian warriors who is trying to defend Persia from Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great takes over, he inherits all of Persia, including the Macedonian land he started from, and Greece, which he and his father conquered together. I hope you know Alexander the Great is not himself Greek. And so what happens when he dies is that the people fighting with him are arguing over who is going to take over all of the land. And they decide they're just going to chunk it up into small pieces. And when they do, it's the Seleucids that take over the Persian land. So that becomes a Persian flag. But I want to go on a brief tangent over the Ptolemies, who take over Egypt, a part of Alexander's expanse. So the Ptolemies, when they take over Egypt, a descendant of that man is Cleopatra. Cleopatra, from her mother's side, is part Persian. And what's interesting is that when the Roman Empire is established, right after Julius Caesar is assassinated, Mark Antony and Augustus plan to take over Egypt. And when they do, Mark Antony goes there, but he accidentally gets into bed, so to speak, with Cleopatra, which is not very good for Rome. So what Rome does, what Augustus does, is they take over Egypt as well. And that's how you get the start of the very big empire that becomes known as the Holy Roman Empire. Within the Roman Empire, which has great influence, the Jews, the Hebrews, are treated absolutely terribly. And so this becomes a part of the legacy that leads into a long history of the Hebrew people being mistreated. Until the Sasanian dynasty, which are Persians, take over Rome. And then, once again, you get people living in peace, because the Zoroastrian foundation is that you're allowed to govern other people, but you're not allowed to tell them what to believe and how to practice their personal faith. And so we have Jews and Christians, Mithrans and Zoroastrians living in peace in the Zoroastrian Empire. So we are here in the year 224. Moving forward, in the year 500, there are 5 major empires on the globe, 2 of which are the Persians, which are Zoroastrian, and the Romans, which are Christian. This is a beautiful building that's not one of the 7 world wonders, but it's on the tentative list, that was originally built by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, but it was destroyed and then rebuilt over and over and over. And so when you look at this building, it's been different kinds of Christian churches. It's been different kinds of Muslim mosque. It's also been a museum, and today it is back to being a mosque. The two empires that I'm focusing on, the Persians and currently the Byzantines, were fighting each other, and both of them became weak trying to fight each other. And meanwhile, the Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula start to rise because of the birth of Islam. So we can see the Byzantine Sasanian War around 610 BC, Common Era, after the year 0, is happening as the revelations are given from the angel Gabriel to Muhammad in the cave. And right when you get the conquests of Mecca, that's when the Persians, the Zoroastrians, and the Romans, who are Catholic, are at their absolute weakest. So it just happened to coincide. And so the Muslims start taking over and Islam spreads like wildfire. There's this idea that the Muslim ideology involved spreading the religion by the sword. It's not true. What's actually happening is that in Islam, you are going to conquer people and charge them less in taxes if they are actually Muslim. And so people who didn't convert to Islam had to pay a higher tax. And this is a part of the influence why many people in France, in Spain, the north part of Africa, all over what we now call the Middle East, started becoming Islamic. And this happened until the year 900s. So we're about here. I want to take a pause because what happens when the Arabs and the Chinese mix is something revolutionary. So when the Arabs fight and win the Tang dynasty, they take as prisoners the paper makers. They take that knowledge, they enhance it, and they create paper mills. And when they do, this begins the translation era where we get, and it happens in Baghdad. So this is Baghdad on a map today. It's sort of to the left of Iran, and this is where you get a lot of the scholarship during the translation era. So at one point, the most intellectual people gathered in Baghdad, and they were working together in peace, trying to uncode all of the truths that is able to uncode. They had optometry beginning here, math beginning here, science beginning here. And this is a very long list of all of the texts that the original versions have disappeared, like the Greek stuff from Aristotle, but they are known to us today because of these Arabs that were inventing the paper mills, rolling out ways to rewrite things. And they had the ability, most of these Persians and Arabs and Chinese and Indians were working together, and they were all teaching each other every language, translating together. And then I have some examples of these people. So this is called an Islamic thinker. He's actually Persian. And so this is also a veiled voice, because if you were to look up the father of algebra or why we have algorithms, you'd see that it's from a Muslim man. And it just so happens that it was under the Abbasid Caliphate, but he's actually Persian. And so Al-Khwarizmi is actually a Persian person who is responsible for inventing a bunch of things. And it is because of him that we have the Fibonacci code. So if you've heard of Fibonacci, the rise of the Enlightenment period, all of the great things we think of when we think of Europe, it was influenced by this man. Avicenna is mentioned in a huge text called Dante's Divine Comedy, and he is also an influencer of the great European Christian thinkers we think of: Thomas Aquinas, Albert the Great, Rene Descartes. He says things in his text that we don't think of when we think of the idea. So if you're in a philosophy class, you've heard of the Cohigo ergo sum from Rene Descartes. He said it first, and he said it thousands of years before. Ferdowsi, another Islamic scholar, he's Persian, just working within Islamic times. Ferdowsi is infamous for a lot of his work, including Shahnameh, and this is his tomb existing in Mashhad city today. The gentleman who translated the humongous Shahnameh works as a professor in Illinois, and this is me interviewing him on my YouTube channel. There is also Al-Ghazali, who is very famous for taking Islam and expanding it into more spiritual ways that argue that you can connect with God here and now. This version of Islam is called Sufism, and he makes that famous, but he also writes a ton about a bunch of things. In 1095, the Roman Empire has absolutely had it that people across the world, as they know it, are converting to Islam. Nobody was sending taxes back to Rome anymore because they were now under the Islamic rule. And so what Pope Urban II does is he declares that all Christians ought to fight anyone who is not on their version of Christianity. And so we can think about the Byzantine Orthodox Church versus the Roman Catholic Church. There was a huge conflict going on there, but there was also conflict with the Romans versus the Muslims. What he does is he tells everyone that the Muslims are taking over the Holy Land that belong to them, the Christians, and that the Christians need to take up arms, go from all over Europe, and make sure that that holy city, Canaan, the Levant, Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, parts of Syria and Lebanon, if you're looking at a map today, is not belonging to the Muslims. Of course, you saw that it was originally the Persians, right? So how does that make sense? Let's dig a little bit deeper. Abraham is a person that God chooses to make a promise with, a covenant with. And Abraham has sex with two different women who give him sons. And in the West, the firstborn son is the person who takes the inheritance of the man, but so too in these ancient times. So we get the idea today from them. The Christians and the Jews believe that the promised land, Canaan, belongs to Abraham's first legitimate son, Isaac. But the Muslims believe that the promised land belongs to Abraham's firstborn son, period, Ishmael. And so there's this huge war going on between the Christians and Jews on one side versus the Muslims on the other. The Christians and the Jews share Abraham and Sarah as their great-great-great-grandma and grandpa, but the Muslims have Abraham with a different woman, Hagar. And this helps to explain why this piece of land is for a very long time debated over who should be running it or whether it should be international or universal. The First Crusades happened and the Christians got what their plan was. So during the First Crusades, they took over the Holy Land and it became under Christian rule. Same time as all of this killing and war, Christians killing Christians that had sided with the Muslims, we have this Islamic philosopher, also Persian, whose name is Rumi, writing things about love. And later, hundreds of years later, the Christians are still crusading, which if the goal was to take over that Holy Land, it's not clear why they were still fighting, but they were. To the left, if you're looking at a map, you have the rise of the Mongols. Now, one of the Mongols is very important for the history of Iran, Hulagu, which is one of the ways to say his name. He founds the Ilkhanate dynasty, which has a part of that piece, modern-day Iran, and that is the piece of land that later turns into the current borders of what we know as in Iran. Now, meanwhile, during all of that killing, you have Muslim philosophers, but also Persians, Hafez, writing about love and butterflies going into flames because they can't help the passion. And then you have the rise of the Ottomans right after the Mongols go up and down in their popularity. The Ottomans are a different kind of Islam. They're not Shiite like the current Persians are. They are Sunni. There's lots of different ways to be a Muslim, even though in Islam it says there's only one way to be a Muslim. The Ottoman conquest changes the history of the globe after they start taking over the land, and they include that promised land. It becomes, again, the Muslims. This is a very important place on earth. Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire after the Byzantines and the Romans had split, and it is Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. When the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, who's a fierce military man, takes over the capital, he stops all of the trade between the Asian continent and the European continent. So when you see here, just for a point of content, there's a big tall building that you can go up into, and it is called Salt Galata. So when you go up this tall building, you can see a bunch of different seas, the Black Sea and the Golden Horn, which leads to the Mediterranean Sea, and it is right on the border of these two continents. So there's Europe on one side, Asia on one side, the Black Sea on one side, the Mediterranean Sea on the other. So when the Ottomans take over this land, they decide that none of the Asians are going to get the European things and vice versa, which has major, major effects. So what happens? Europe decides that they're going to find a different way to get into India so that they can continue importing all of the goods. And they send expeditioners. Spain sends Christopher Columbus. Britain sends John Cobalt. And then we get the slave trade because Britain and France, and also no one talks about Portugal, but they were a part of this. They start buying people from African kings. They made a purchase and they were using them as goods. And when we think of the slaves, we Americans, we think of the transatlantic slave trade, bringing people from Africa into the Caribbean and Haiti and America, the Americas. But what I want to help you understand is that Iran was also a part of this. And Iran is situated on Earth in a terrestrial way that gives it lots of ports because it has the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, it goes into the Indian Ocean, it goes into the Arabian Sea, there is the Caspian Sea at the top. So these are our current ports. Iran was a part of the slave trade. But when you look at slavery in Iran, it looks almost nothing like slavery anywhere else, but they do too, indeed, have slaves. While the slave trade was going on, we had the rise of the Mughal emperor. And the empire is parts of Afghanistan, Pakistan, the tips of Iran, and then India. And you have Emperor Akbar the Great, who ended all discrimination based on any kind of faith-based difference. And he is half Persian, and he practices a part of Zoroastrian faith, which says you're allowed to have people as your servants and demand that they pay taxes, but let them believe what they want to believe. When you think of the Taj Mahal, you probably don't think of Persians, but the Taj Mahal was built by a man who had a Persian wife, and he built the Taj Mahal when his Persian wife died in honor of her. And they also spoke the Persian language, Farsi. When you think of Iran and India, you might think of them as very, very far apart, but actually here's to scale. Iran is touching all the way on the beautiful beaches of Gaza to parts of India today. That is to scale the size of America, and that is to scale the size of the United States. Okay, so back to the right on the map here, going to the Ottomans. The rise of the Ottoman Empire and the stopping of the trade makes a lot of people uneasy because what they had gotten accustomed to, like eating bananas, you eat bananas, they don't grow in America, what would we do without trade? The Ottomans stopping the trade had a lot of global impact. So we have the Allied powers versus the Central powers during World War I. And when you look at before that war and after that war, the Middle East, terrible word, looks a lot differently. And the reason for that is because Great Britain and the French had controlled a lot of the parts of this land. So we really want to get into political science, look at anthropology, study history, and see how does this even happen in the first place. But nevertheless, a lot of this land was controlled by the British and the French. And what we have here is while the Ottomans, which are Muslims, are trying to figure out who is helping the other side, and they're killing all of the people they thought were spies, so all of the Christians, we call it the Armenian genocide, but it was really a genocide against all Christians. The Armenian genocide is going on. Great Britain and France are working together in secret, and they're silently making deals with both the Arabs and the Hebrews, promising both something that they give neither group to, and it's called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. That's a very important document. When you look at what they were agreeing to, they were looking at the Ottoman Empire and they were saying, okay, when we win this war, which we will, who's going to own which part of this land? And they drew lines on a map and decided who was going to control what. And when they drew those lines, they had no regard for ethnicity, language, food, religion. They drew lines in the sand and they say, I'll take this, you take that. Very much like the story I told you with Augustus and Mark Antony, and this happens over and over in history. Isn't it great to learn? Now, it happens to be that where the oil fields and the gas fields are in this area very well lines up with the land that the British and the French wanted to either control completely or influence. These are the countries that were just randomly created. So when you look at countries like Iraq or Jordan, you might think, oh, those have just existed. But when did they exist? When did they form as nations? The major countries that were directly carved up by the Sykes-Picot Agreement and then later had to do some changes are on the screen here. Iran was not a part of that. Iran is one of the only countries in that region that we call the Middle East that has not been directly controlled by Great Britain, but it was heavily influenced. So we want to think about that. Let's take a little transition and go a little bit more into the current times. In 1921, the British and Russia worked with the United States to break up all of the democracy that was existing in Iran, and they put into power a monarch. They took the prime minister of Iran and they created a kingdom around him through propaganda. And this is him, Reza Shah Pahlavi. what he did once he became in power is he started westernizing. He started building schools that were for women and men together. He started increasing the infrastructure. He started new pipelines. He also made the hijab illegal. The hijab is a sign of Islam, and he wanted none of that. So he made it illegal. So if you wanted to wear the hijab, he would not allow that. What's going on in the background and why this is so important is that in the 30s, Austria and Germany vote for Hitler to come and rule them. And when that's going on, it really makes Russia and the United Kingdom worried that Iran is going to work with the Germans. And so they perform Operation Countenance, where they're going to ensure that by controlling Iran, which has a lot of natural resources, that the Germans won't be able to get that. So what do? They ensure through propaganda that this gentleman who was the Shah is abdicated. He leaves and he brings in his son to take his seat. This is his son, the second Shah of Iran, the last Shah of Iran. And he was raised in Europe. He went to French schools. He has a Swiss education. He was very, very westernized. And so the United Kingdom was happy for him after he left France to go and be the face of Iran. What's going on in the background is that the Persian people had democratically voted for this Persian man who grew up in Iran to be their head. In 1951, Mossadegh nationalizes the oil, which is huge, huge. So if you think about where Iran is sitting, it is on top of and right next to a bunch of gas, liquid gas. Also, there's lots of different ways that we can look at chemicals and how we use them, gas and oil, different kinds of oil, including petroleum. And so Iran is right there on top of all of these natural resources that we use today to run our nation. So it's not very good for this Persian man to say that the Persians are going to just use it for themselves and not have heavy taxes on other people who want to buy it. So Operation Ajax is when the British government and the American government work to use propaganda to get him kicked out of his power, which works. He goes on house arrest and he's there until he dies. And the Shah has no one fighting against him because his only opponent was the person who all the Persians wanted, Mossadegh, and he came down from his power. And there are lots of books about this detailing how much money America put up if somebody gets Mossadegh out of his position of influence. In 1954, which is that 25-ish years ago, Iran signed an agreement promising that he would continue the use of Iran's natural resources for the British and for America, but also to allow all of the trade to go through that land. And so now Strait of Hormuz comes up because it's not just what Iran is supplying, it is also what they are allowing other people to supply. The very south of Iran, remember I showed you that beautiful island Kish? It's in the Persian Gulf. And right next to the Persian Gulf is this tiny stretch of land that comes out like a horn. And at its tip, it's 21 miles of water until you get to the Arab country, UAE, and the other Arab country, Oman. So the Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile stretch of water where all of these tankers need to go through if they want to export oil and gas to go into Asia, to go into Europe. And if you look into the data of how much oil, it's like 20 million barrels every single day on average. It's a very important stretch of waterway. And it's ran by Iran. And this is what you might be seeing in the news today, Iran threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has like 12 or so little tiny islands there, and they do have the power to do that. And if they did, it would be devastating to places like China that need that oil to produce all the things that they sell to people like us who use all of that stuff. Okay, so meanwhile, the Shah is getting filthy rich off of this money that he is making by making all these promises and selling all of this oil and gas. And the Persian people are absolutely upset about it. They are shouting things like death to America. They're saying that the Shah is just his puppet. And there's lots of protests against him. And you can see that there was lots of propaganda against Iran working with the Shah. And what the Shah does is he creates something like a secret agency of policemen that are going to look at everyone outside of the country and everyone inside of the country to squash anybody who's saying anything against what he is doing. And these people were torturers, murderers. We have lots of documents showing this. And the reason is that the law allowed it. There's one seat left if you're tired. So in their new penal code, they allowed for imprisonment, for death, to anyone who goes against the Shah. And they use beautiful language like someone who's inciting violence, because it would be violence to go against the government. So when you look up their laws, it was totally legal what they were doing, because the lawmakers are the ones who make the laws, right? So he and some other countries like Venezuela, very important, create organizations like OPEC. Maybe you've heard of OPEC. So Iran is the center of all of this petroleum, natural gas, and oil being exported. He also continues what his father was doing, which was to westernize. So women in schools, women looking beautiful, women as doctors, women as lawyers, women as basically anything you'd want. If you could dream it, you can do it. And men and women were being treated equally. They were able to get a divorce before that. And after that, women could not get a divorce without their husband allowing it. Women were able to leave the country. Right now, women can't leave the country without their husband allowing it. And America is doing business with 3 different presidents in a row. One had a very short life. In 1971, it's time to celebrate the Persian Empire and the Zoroastrian idea of treating people like they're human beings. And what he does, the Shah, is he throws a party. It is the first and last ever global party. He invites every single president, emperor, sultan from all over the world. He has the venue in Persepolis, which is in the middle of nowhere. So how are you going to have hundreds of people from all of the countries in the world? He had to import from France, where he knew a lot of people. He lived there for a long time. He imported huge houses where these people had tents. They had air conditioner. They had ice in the middle of the desert. 50,000 songbirds were flown in so that there could be birds in the garden, which he created from scratch. Thousands of bottles of alcohol, because pre-Islam, you can drink alcohol. In Islam, alcohol is outruled. He flew in all of the waiters from this restaurant that was very famous in France. He was essentially trying to westernize Iran and showing the West that Iran was not only equal, but better than what other people decided was the Western standard of sophistication. And he is going back and forth in the United States, working with, again, 3 presidents, but at this time, Jimmy Carter. And the people are very upset. The people at this time had very low income. They had very low quality of life when you compared it to what they were before and what they could be and what they saw on television, other people living as. And they are marching in the streets, demanding that a better Persian ruler come in. We'll have to talk about who that guy is. He is critical. And what the Iranian Shah does at that time is he tries to squash all of the ability for anyone to go against him in some kind of democratic vote. So he tries to solidify the political party in Iran by just eliminating anything other than him. So who's this guy and why were people marching in the streets to get him to come to Iran? This is Khomeini, the first and the one of the 2 supreme leaders of Iran, which is a position he just made up. And he has been writing against Israel, against creating Israel, which was created in 1948, against America, creating Israel, against Britain, working with America to have control over Iran. He's against westernization. He's against the idea that women shouldn't be covered. He's against the idea that women should sing in public. And he is very Islamic. He grows up in Qom, which is one of the most Islamic small villages in Iran. And as things are happening worldwide, he is a scholar, so he learns about it and he writes typically against it. The Shah gets him exiled from Iran by 1964 because he's getting a lot of power. A lot of the students are reading his work against the Shah and they're getting behind him, which is why when the Shah was doing things that wasn't good for the people, the students took to the streets and they were marching for him to come back. Now, he was also secretly working with President Carter, who was also publicly working with the Shah. And there are documents that are now unclassified where we can see writing between Khomeini and Carter administration promising that if Carter helps Khomeini take power, that he would still get all of the oil that he wants. And this is a leaked document from the White House, which is now unclassified anyway, where America is basically saying, okay, let's work with Khomeini and see what he can do. And that's exactly what happens. Khomeini gets created for him this new broadcast communication, maybe you've heard of the BBC, and he uses it to infiltrate the Iranian people, spewing the propaganda, not saying what he's going to do when he gets to power, just saying that he should come back and help the Iranian people. And thousands of people protest. Lots of them are killed because the Iranian government at that time had that SAVAK. But in Islam, for example, to die for a good cause is exactly the kind of thing that you should do. So despite the fact that lots of them were imprisoned and tortured and murdered, that's not a bother because martyrdom is viewed as holy. And the Shah of Iran and his beautiful wife, Farah, they flee. They flee and they go to America. The Iranian people are very angry that he got to just go to America, and they stormed the United States Embassy in 1979, and they demand that America sends back their Shah so they can deal with him in the right way. But what do they find when they go in there? They find all of these documents that had not totally been shredded, that people were able to piece together, and it showed proof that America was the reason why Mossadegh lost his power and went into house arrest. They find the Black Room report. Look that up. And Khomeini is declared the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is called the Islamic Revolution. It's really the Iranian Revolution. And now we're in the year 1979. If you try to figure out what the revolution was all about and how it started, it takes you to 1977. Well, I took you all the way to the beginning. And I'm just trying to get you to have some curiosity to go learn more about these things. And a revolution means an overthrow of the current government. So you don't quite know what's going to happen next. This is what happened next. Iran has had this many presidents, all underneath a supreme leader. There's only been 2 supreme leaders. The supreme leader can add a law, edit a law, delete a law, do whatever he wants, even if the president says no. So the top people are allowed to do whatever they want. There's been 2. That's our current one. And he used to be one of the 3rd president. And then we have a new president as of 2024 in Iran because the previous one died in a helicopter crash. And since 1979, it is absolutely illegal for a woman to do many of the things that you would think of as normal, like riding a bicycle. And since 1977, millions of people have fled Iran. Lots of them have come to this beautiful country where a woman can speak and show her hair like this. And what you want to think about later is what happens at the same time. So after 1979, the Muslims, they take over, if you can call them Muslim, and then there's the Iran-Iraq War. The Iran-Iraq War is very important because even though everyone knew that Iraq was using chemical warfare, which is a big no-no in trying to take over land against the Iranians, 1 million Iranians died, the United States still helped Iraq. The United States helped Saddam Hussein in his attempt to take over Iran. And of course, this is another reason why Americans would be upset with America. But as if that wasn't enough, Operation Praying Mantis involved, at the very end of this war, the American government shooting down a passenger plane where 290 people, Americans, died, and they were also chanting death to America for that reason. As soon as the Islamic Republic of Iran was established in 1979, all of the people who had been anti-Islam or pro-Shah were rounded up and killed. There are mass graves that are still being found now. And this is absolutely horrendous. We have documents from Amnesty International showing just how bad they were treated. But it wasn't just anyone who was against Islam, anyone who's pro the Shah. They were specifying certain ethnic groups, especially the Baha'i people, who every few years, a bunch of them are rounded up and publicly hung. In 2022, Mahsa Amini is one of the people who's not following the hijab correctly. She is taken into imprisonment and she dies. And for some reason, this woman, even though there have been hundreds of women that are beaten or even killed from the police brutality in Iran, is the cornerstone of a new movement, Women, Life, Freedom. And the protests are happening inside of Iran, but Iran's also squashing those protests. They turned off the internet, for example, and they made it really hard for people to rally, although the people who were around small communities were protesting inside of Iran. But what was really getting momentum is the people outside of Iran bringing attention to what's going on there. And so thousands of cities across the globe got together to march in solidarity for this women life freedom movement. And one of the very top guys in the Iranian government said that if somebody is going to incite fear in society, they should be killed. Essentially, if you're protesting, we're allowed to kill you. And hundreds of the protesters were killed. Iran uses live ammunition, real bullets, to shoot into crowds to disperse the crowds. But it's not just that. They're also found later on social media. They're brought into jails and then they're tortured, released, or just murdered. Some of them have disappeared, but there's 551 definite cases of people who were killed only because they protested against the killing of the woman Mahsa Amini. And many of them are tortured beyond recognition. Lots of the women are raped. For example, in Islam, you're not allowed to impose capital punishment on a person who's a virgin. So if the woman is raped, now she could be killed. And a lot of backlash was going on because people were spreading the word about all of these rapes. And then the people who were talking about it were going missing. At the same time, you had deliberate poisonings. You saw 7,000 schoolgirls fall sick in just a few months. Girls' school, they're separate from the boys' school. There was a journalist who was writing about it. He was arrested, he disappeared, and then 2 years later, he surfaced in March of 2025. He was acquitted of all charges, but he was still in prison for 2 years just for talking about it. This woman, you can't find her now. She's in hiding. She won the Nobel Peace Prize for trying to talk about women just being treated as human beings. And lots of the people have been killed, if not tortured. So these are just the capital punishments, and it's not equal. So I want to focus on the different ethnicities and teach you a little bit more about what Iran has to offer. There was 183 of the 901 people that the government killed were Kurdish people. So there is a huge invisible line where Kurdish people live and have lived for thousands of years. And that line is cut into by these new borders that just came out of different agreements between governments. And part of Kurdistan, which is where they live, is in Iran. And the Iranian government is very much against that. When you look at the ethnic minorities, there's a lot, because there's less than about 50% of Iranians are also the ethnic group called Persians. So that means that about half of the people that are Iranian are not Persian, but instead they're Kurdish, or they're Arab, or they're Turkmen. All of these different ethnic groups have their own religion, their own version of faith, their own different ideas about how to dress. They have different food, they have different music, they dress differently, and they're all just treated the same and required to have this sort of uniform in the country, if you will. In 2023, as a response to all of the protests to the Mahsa Amini killing in 2022, the government tried to have even harsher laws. And those laws say things like, if you get caught not wearing the hijab, you can be kept from leaving the country. You can get 2 years of imprisonment just if we catch you not fully covering your hair. And these are Islamic women who are protesting that the government didn't actually enforce that rule. So some women in Iran want everybody to be covered in this way. Here are a few of them. And the president, whose voice doesn't matter more than the supreme leader, in September of 2025, said what he's been saying all along, which is that it should be a woman's right to choose whether she wants to cover or not, which is exactly what it says in the holy book of Muslims. But the Iranian Supreme National Security Council still hasn't enacted it. Right now, literally today, the people in Iran are suffering from a drought. There's been about 60 years where the water is very, very low, to the point where the government turns off the water after a particular time every single night in major areas. And November 7th, right? Today's November 13th. The same guy who said protesters should be killed is saying that one of the reasons why this drought is happening is that women are running in the streets acting sinfully. Because women aren't wearing the hijab, God is punishing people, and this is his warning. And it's 2025, it's almost done. Next month is December. How many people has the Iranian government killed so far? As of September, 1,000. And this is just the official ones that the government knows about, that Amnesty International can report on. And just a few days ago, these two men were raising the Iranian flag from pre-Islamic times, and they were arrested because to wave the pre-Islamic flag is illegal. As if those were better times. In the last 105 years, these four men have controlled Iran, the two making Islam illegal, trying to westernize, and these two making westernization illegal, trying to Islamify. I hope you research some of what I said. Thank you for coming.